U.S. President Donald Trump has shared favorable prospects regarding tariff talks with South Korea following his phone call with acting President Han Duck-soo. We have more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Wednesday, April 9th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. The art of the deal for South Korea is negotiation over retaliation in response to Mr. Trump's country-tailored tariffs that are in effect as of today. For more on this, I have Ruy Valdes with Spanish news agency EFE Spain here in the studio. Ruy, welcome back.
Nice to be here.
I also have Professor Kim Yong-jin at Sogang University joining our session virtually. Professor Kim, as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to be there.
Right. We will start here in the studio, Ruy. Like I mentioned in the clip, acting President Han Duck-soo and U.S. President Donald Trump spoke on the phone on Tuesday, Korea time. Let's begin with details of their conversation.
Yeah, let's be clear on something. This was not a diplomatic courtesy call. This was actually the beginning of a high-stakes commercial negotiation or trade negotiation. And, well, in the side of Trump, he pointed out that they discussed several sectors, being, of course, the 25% tariffs that have been applied from today, the tremendous and unsustainable trade surplus that he allegedly says both countries have, the defense cost sharing of the troops that are stationed here in Korea, and the Alaska LNG pipeline. So as you can see, these are very different sectors, and what we can understand by this is, like we have been talking in the other programs, that with Trump and tariffs, it's not only a matter of trade. It depends on each country what he wants to get from, right? So, like I say, here we are combining defense, gas deals, and other parts. I want to point out something. I'm sure Professor Kim can elaborate on what Han Duck-soo said in the CNN interview, but I found it quite interesting because South Korea has taken a stance of not retaliation, as China and Japan are doing. And this is interesting because many economists point out that whenever another country wants to raise tariffs, the best thing that you can do in terms of affecting less your citizens is nothing. But this sounds very good in paper, but it's actually very hard to do in real life because it has a very high political cost. So the fact that Han is showing openness in negotiating, it means that maybe he's taking a political risk in the sense of, instead of fighting face-to-face with Trump, which is something that the citizens could say, oh, he's showing weakness against the U.S. What he might actually be betting is that Korea doesn't have a generalized anti-U.S. sentiment. We could see this, many American flags in the protests that were in favor of Yoon. So maybe he has a space to actually take this measure of openness. He even mentioned in a cool way. He mentioned it 3 times, very emphatic, emphasized he was going to negotiate in a cool way, not with the stomach, in order to get some deal. So what I'm trying to say here is that Korea is open for negotiation and is going to take this different stance that I'm sure Professor will elaborate more.
Right, then let's go straight to the Professor. Professor Kim, as Ruy here in the studio mentioned, speaking in an interview with CNN, acting President Han Duck-soo spoke of negotiation rather than retaliation with regard to Trump tariffs, and he also played down prospects of a trilateral economic response, including South Korea, Japan, and China, to U.S. import duties. What are your takeaways?
Right, just like acting President Han Duck-soo mentioned, we are totally relying on the U.S. for our defense, and also the U.S. is the largest in our export market for semiconductors and also automobiles and other product like cosmetics. So we cannot actually fight back to the U.S. Tariff policy just like the countries like China and Japan, they have, their own big markets. The domestic, economy would be enough to make, the economic growth for their people. But for us, we are very limited in that sense. If we do not have, U.S. support, our defense might be, in trouble. Our export might be in trouble. So we have to negotiate. I think, the acting president Han Duck-soo has a very, very realistic view about this, tariff war.
Right, and while we wait for the fruits of negotiation between South Korea and the U.S., Ruy, the Korean stock market, it tumbled at the start of this work week, triggering a circuit breaker, I believe, for about 5 minutes during early morning trade back on Monday. How has the stock market been faring since then?
Yeah, the week began with panic, with this sidecar order that had to be implemented at the opening on Monday of the stock market. Then there was a little bit of optimism on Tuesday with a small but positive growth in the Korean stock market. But today we ended up again in red, showing that, well, today is the day that the tariffs of 25% begin. So it shows this nervousism and worry in the markets. All the top cap companies show, well, most of them show negative results. So yeah, basically, if you see the stock markets in Korea, in Asia, and all over the world, it seems very clear that Trump's measures are having a negative effect on them and in the investors.
Right. Now, the reciprocal tariffs, the country-specific tariffs, as you mentioned, they went into effect today. But the 25% tariff on car imports into the American market went into effect last Thursday. That was April 3rd. And in light of that, a Singaporean daily, Ruy, wrote an interesting article about the impact of these U.S. tariffs on small and mid-sized businesses that make the nuts and bolts for cars. Could you tell us a bit about that coverage and your takeaways from it?
Yeah, sometimes when we see this news, we hear all the household names, like big companies. We focus on car companies, for example, like Hyundai, Kia, etc., etc. But actually, the auto part industry, well, of course, without parts, a car cannot run, right? So it's very, very important. What this article was saying is that metal rings, springs, and fasteners that are used in suspension, pistons, and gear systems are in the front line of this tariff war, which it means that for car manufacturing companies, the costs are going to go sky high if these tariffs stay implemented as the way they are. Just as Professor Kim was saying, in terms of the strength of countries like Japan or China in their local markets or the local economies to survive or at least navigate this turmoil, you could think that, yeah, big car factories, manufacturers are going to do the same. They have enough capital to try to navigate, but these small and mid-sized enterprises who actually feed these big companies are the ones who are going to suffer the most. Let's always remember that when tariffs are implemented, the people that are going to suffer the most, or the companies that are going to suffer the most, are the ones that lack capital. So what we are seeing or forecasting, or what is mentioned in this article, it's a very significant increase of cost for the car manufacturers. And just so we have an idea of context, the auto industry in South Korea is the main, also the products of the auto industry are the main products that are exported to US, from South Korea to the US. So this is a big, big hit for this country, as Professor Kim was saying. Everything related, so Korea depends a lot on the US market for all these things. The Korean government on the side today, it announced that it was going to take some measures together with the big car companies like Hyundai and Kia, where they're going to inject liquidity, I think, of 3 billion won, 2 billion from the government, 1 billion for the private sector, to help SMEs to survive these hits until they find, or they hope they find some kind of negotiation, which is all their negotiations are focused on reducing tariffs right now with Trump.
Right, and to be clear, of course, the tariff on car imports went into effect on April 3rd, but the tariff, Professor Kim, on car parts imports, I believe, will take effect by May 3rd, of course. That being said, Professor Kim, foreign automakers are responding to U.S. tariffs on car imports with layoffs as well as halts in exports to the American market. But Korea's Hyundai has pledged no price hikes for the next 2 months. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, everybody knows, like, if the tariff goes over 25%, most imported cars may lose their competitive advantage in terms of price, which means the number of cars sold may decrease. So the companies need to address this issue, especially like Ruy mentioned, the small and medium enterprises. They don't have, a lot of money to stay in this kind of, high prices. They have to import all the things, and then the price goes up. They also have to pay, all those kind of tariff, and they would not have, competitive advantage in terms of the price. And basically, there are two ways of responding to this, Trump's tariff policy. First one is to improve efficiency and productivity. And the easiest way of doing it is to cut cost by reducing labors and other cost. And second one is to reduce the amount of production itself because of the cost of inventory keeping. In the case of Hyundai Motors, the situation is a little bit different. Hyundai Motors has enjoyed decent operational profit in the U.S. market so far, which means it has some buffer to deal with the high tariff without raising the consumer price for a while, to keep the competitive advantage. But with taking the loss for a while, from their operational profit, probably Hyundai Motors may leverage their profit not to raise the price of the cars while increasing the production in the U.S., so that they can catch up the market more.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Ruy, while Trump tariffs are, of course, triggering quite a bit of concern beyond the borders of America, within America, his tariffs are also being condemned by members of the public. I understand thousands took to the streets this past weekend. Do tell us a bit more about these protests.
Yeah, these protests had different nature, right? Of course, there was the economic nature of it, of the decisions that have been taken by the Trump administration, but there was also the concern about deep cuts to public programs, LGBT rights, the immigration issues, and the government downsizing. But what we can say is that these things are not unrelated. If you are cutting employment in this government downsizing, and then you mix that up with high inflation that comes from the tariffs, then politically it doesn't really look that promising for Trump. We are still wondering how he's going to pull that off. But retailers like Costco and Walmart have also reported things like they see people are hoarding products, preparing for this increase in prices, no? So there's many signs, including Trump support that is right now less than 50%, and that has been decreasing like 4 points, I think, since he started. So there's anger, and there is disappointing. A big part of, well, you could say there was before. There's people that don't support him since the beginning. But the new thing is that it seems that some Republican base is also turning his back on these policies. There's a factor that is very important to take into account. Even Republicans who will run for office for different offices across the U.S., they are worried, how am I going to get reelected, or how am I going to get elected if this is the if there's going to be big consequences related to the economic issues. So yeah, thousands of people went out all across U.S. from Alaska to New York. I think, this name is like the hands-off rallies, they're calling them. And yeah, it's clearly this is going to have an impact, at least politically, for Trump.
Right, and against that backdrop, Ruy, there are some pundits who claim that Mr. Trump's tariff campaign, therefore, will not last very long. What exactly are they saying and why?
Well, I was actually excited to answer that question because yesterday I was listening to Paul Krugman in a podcast with for the NYT, for the New York Times, and he was saying something very interesting, which is that he has been, or not only him, but many people have been thinking, well, maybe there's like an objective that is not clear in all these decisions taken by the Trump administration. But the more and more they analyze, he gets to the conclusion that it's quite improvised. So pundits like him or others, what are after the Trump administration, for example, reveals how they calculated these tariffs to get, like, for example, the 25% or the 34%, the 25% for Korea or the 34% for China, was not really based on economic theory or in any strong policy that was taken in the past. So the worry now is that probably Trump is really just responding to a surrounding of, he's getting surrounded by people that don't really question him, and that he has shown this idea that if you balance trade, that if you don't have a deficit, somehow the economy will do better and all those things, and people are not daring to confront him and tell him, hey, maybe the decision that you're taking is not right. And they compare it to two things. In his first term, the person who was in charge more or less on the recruiting was Jared Kushner, who he focused a little bit more on getting people that you could say they were a little bit more serious or had some kind of background to defend their positions. But now the one who is in charge is the son of Donald Trump, and apparently the people he recruited or he recommended for the team are people that will align to whatever Trump says. So the concern here is that maybe all of this is not taken by a deep thought, but it's not well thought or well designed, and we're looking at a chaos that is made out of maybe somebody's gut.
I see. Well, hopefully time will tell us.
Yes.
And in the meantime, though, Professor Kim, speaking within your capacity as a scholar, what are your prospects with regard to Mr. Trump's tariff policy? Do you see his tariffs lasting, or do you believe they will eventually be lifted?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I actually don't know the key purpose of Trump tariff policy, and then his purpose would be accomplished. As a scholar, it's kind of very, doubtful. And he's arguing that he can resolve the twin deficit problems, I mean, trade and fiscal deficit problems by using the tariff measures. However, it won't be easy to achieve the goal. Here's the mechanisms, how other countries would respond. First of all, countries try to decrease the value of their currency to nullify the tariff. What I mean by this is that the value of the currency of any country goes down by the commensurable rate to the tariff. The country may keep the price competitiveness. For example, Korean won goes down 26% or 25% in its value, and the Korean exporters do not need to raise their prices because they can sell the product at the exactly same price before the tariff. Even further, if the import price goes up, it will be transferred to the U.S. consumers. The domestic prices go up, to cause huge inflation, which basically cannot be accepted by the U.S. consumers and the company. If the prices goes up, consumers reduce consumptions, U.S. companies reduce production and investment. The economy goes down further. This is a kind of vicious cycle of the economy. So what I can expect is that eventually Mr. Trump, has to give up the tariff policy, even though he says that there is no possibility for him to lift it up. And what he says is that no pain, no gain, right? But I don't think, the U.S. people can stand it like, for 6 or, 1 year. Absolutely not. Probably 6 months would be like the maximum time Mr. Trump might have before he lifts the policy.
Right, I see, 6 months. Well, for the time being, the arena seeing the most pain, if I may, is probably the stock markets, especially here in Asia, that have crashed, of course. And keeping financial markets in mind, what are some other indicators, Ruy, that we may keep our eye on to see how these country-specific tariffs that went into effect today are affecting each country?
Yeah, the tariffs are coming and the ripple effects will show up fast. I would recommend to check export volume and shipping orders outside of KOSPI, factory output and inventory buildup, the exchange rate, which I didn't mention before, but the Korean won keeps going down. I think today it was in the lowest since 2009, maybe, since the financial crisis. And of course, in the side of the US, the retail and wholesale prices. There's one other thing that people in South Korea could look at, which is the local performance of American companies. One would imagine that if Trump's idea was right, the US companies will bet on it, no? Will be gaining, or consumers will look at them. But if you look at the stocks, like, let's say Apple, they're decreasing significantly. So if you have to look at what is happening locally, but also what's happening inside of the US, maybe companies, it seems, they are not following this as a safe bet of Trump. They are actually very concerned too.
Right, and back here on the local front, Professor Kim, some of the economic priorities for South Korea as we speak are reviving domestic consumption and of course responding to US tariffs. That being said, Professor Kim, what do you propose to promote these priorities of South Korea?
Well, at the moment, the most important issue to me is to revive the domestic consumption, considering the number of self-employed people. The number of self-employed people in Korea is about 6 million, which is ranked about 6th in the OECD countries. And they are in extreme difficulties due to the sluggish domestic economy. And also the recent disastrous wildfire has caused more trouble to people, middle and low class people, and small and medium enterprises too. So probably we need additional budget to boost up domestic consumption. And then we need to really think about how to deal with Mr. Trump tariff issues. Mr. Trump at his phone call meeting with acting President Duck-soo said, well, if you bring something to close the gap of trade deficit between U.S. and Korea, we are welcome to negotiate. And what he says is a comprehensive negotiation. Like, Ruy mentioned that we need to bring the issues like the construction of Alaska pipeline, the natural gas pipeline, more import of natural gases, more import of, let's say, the food and also agricultural product. All that kind of things, and also we may have to increase the defense expenses. So I think this is quite expected. I always talk about these issues in this way. So Trump is really transactional leader. So we have to prepare something to negotiate for dealing with his tariff policy.
Right, Professor Kim, as quite a number of pundits have said, he appears to be using tariffs as a form of leverage with regard to talks or cooperation with his partners. I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Professor Kim, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And
thanks for having me
here in the studio, thank you very much for your time. Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching.